Everyone. Welcome back to the Jagged Edge, where you have our most recurring, long-time, original OG, whichever you want to call it, guest, me, O'Brien. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, John. How are you?
Doing wonderful, watching some Champions League football, and we're here to talk about some defensive prospects for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Javal, how are you today?
Fortunately, I'm still a Jags fan, so could be better, but they haven't pissed me off yet. I'm just everything is up until limbo in this draft, man. I'm just if they nail this draft, we're back. If they fail this draft, then I'm dead. So my mental status is in Trent Baalke's hands, so I'm scared. But until then, we're doing all right.
Before we recorded, you told me that I need to stop trying to kill myself for everything I watch, whether it was football, basketball, soccer, baseball, wrestling. It's funny that you also mentioned that because I also am the similar boat when it comes to the Jags. But Mia, you got to give us a little bit of hope or a little bit of cold water to our hopes and dreams. So we're gonna just get right into it. The most important position that everybody feels like the Jaguars need to address, whether it's the earliest pick that they got or as late as day two, but cornerback has been the ugly rearing head in the room with the new scheme, new defensive coordinator. What do you got tidbit wise for the cornerback class for the in relation to the Jags coming into the next few weeks for the draft?
Yeah, I know from people I've talked to at the Miller Electric Center, especially after the acquisition of Stephon Diggs by the AFC South rival Houston Texans. The response I got from multiple people was, well, we better draft a corner now. And I had had conversations with people leading into the Diggs trade about the corner position, knowing that Ryan Nielsen likes to run a lot of press man. You heard of in his introductory presser refer to nothing cheap, nothing deep. He is revered in Atlanta. He was there 1 year. I have had more than one person in the Atlanta camp, both in the building and reporters, say to me that they believe he's a future head coach. The fact that he was able to work wonders as he did with a limited personnel in Atlanta says that if he is given the personnel he desires here in Jacksonville, this is a guy who could flip a defense into a top three, top five units. Now, a lot has to go right for that to be the case. And we can begin with that all important cornerback position. I think what people are maybe forgetting in the discourse surrounding the open hole opposite Tyson Campbell is number one, yes, they did sign Ronald Darby. As of now, he would be the starter if he were to roll the ball out and play today. But number two, to get to nothing cheap, nothing deep, to get to having the conversation of press man corners on an island, you have to create pressure up front. And so that's where, as much as we've been so dialed into, there's this gaping hole opposite Tyson. How do you fill it? Tyson is in a contract year. We also need to remember that the edge position last year, the Jaguars largely left untouched and ran it back. They said, we are banking on development. We are banking on Dewan Smoot coming back and being fully healthy. And we think Caleb on Jason can actually do a thing or two. If Trent Baalke says he lives with regrets, I believe there is one big regret and is not addressing that position. And knowing the plethora, I want to call it a stable, I guess, of edge rushers that Ryan Nielsen had in his disposal, not just in Atlanta, but also in New Orleans, where he was the co-defense coordinator. That's where I think, as much as we've all been playing chess, thinking the focus needs to be on corner, I do think Ryan Nielsen would still be happy and still be able to run the defense that he wants to if he's able to get yet another elite edge defender. And also, which I probably should have led with, but we will close with this. I do know that many people in the Jaguars building, as is exemplified, I suppose, by the players they've had in for top 30 visits over the last 2 weeks, the Jaguars believe that this is a very deep cornerback class. They believe they can find a starter to begin his career day one opposite Tyson Campbell in the second or third round. And so that is where I don't think they necessarily have to be locked in at 17 because there are pressing needs, including on the defensive side of the ball.
That's a pretty good point, which you talked about, and how everyone's really locked in on corner. And I think for good reason, because it matches both the talent matches the need at the top. I mean, Quignon's probably not going to be there, but we'll see. I think Terrion, a lot of people have them as a top 20 pick. So it makes sense that they could go corner round one. I also do think that, I mean, I wouldn't be upset if they took an edge player. I mean, they even did visits with Jared Verge. They did visit a couple defensive ends. They did a visit. I'm just looking at Big Cat Country to look at their visits, which a lot of them have via me O'Brien. They're kind of funny, but there's a lot of defensive ends they've looked at. Both, I mean, Verse is a pretty high draft pick. Chop's probably going to go round one. A couple late round guys, Muhammad Kamara. So I think they definitely will go edge. It's just really a question of how early, because they definitely could. If they go edge at 17, I wouldn't really be upset. They could go edge anytime, but I think it's a position that they need to at least get another guy just in the room, because you need more depth. And I think having Travis Gibson is a nice depth piece. Having Eric Armstead is going to help the defensive line. So I'm really just curious. Do you think that when it comes to, is it going to be just another edge player specifically? Do you think it also maybe look at another three tech kind of player? Because there's also guys, Johnny Newton, Byron Murphy. Those are potential guys they could take at 17. They might be available. So do you think it's just going to be specifically an edge player, or it's kind of just, he could take any good defensive lineman that can help rush the passer?
Yeah, I've seen the discourse on the timeline, especially over the last 48 hours or so, that Jaguar fans are now all of a sudden on April 9th in love with Johnny Newton, and they're just discovering who Byron Murphy is. Coach Campo, Dave Campo, the former coach of the Cowboys, now works with me at 1010XL. He has been on the Byron Murphy train for months, weeks. He has consistently said he believes he's a guy who, when you look at the Miami Dolphins losing Christian Wilkins, and so many people have said to the Dolphins, you realize there's not that many humans wandering around our universe that look like Christian Wilkins. Well, there is, and his name is Byron Murphy, even if he's a little bit smaller. And so I think that there are guys that can be game wreckers, and even if they don't have the stat numbers that an edge guy would, I just think that there is more depth right now with the signing of Eric Armstead, knowing you still have Roy Robertson Harris, knowing you drafted Tyler Lacey in the 4th round last year. Adam Gotsis is still under contract. There's more bodies, quite frankly, along that interior of the defensive front than there are in the edge room. Because if the Jags were to line up today, we're looking at a situation where Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker are once again playing close to 85% of the snaps. Travis Gibson spelling them, and perhaps a little bit more than Dewan Smoot on one leg, for lack of a better term. And then you're counting on Yasir Abdullah, who flashed in the preseason. But I am genuinely curious what Ryan Nielsen views Abdullah as. I personally could see a world in which he says to Abdullah, yeah, you're in the edge room, but you're also in the inside linebacker room, and I'm going to use you as essentially a chess piece, like I did with Caden Ellis in Atlanta. And he was able to somehow, some way scheme up Caden Ellis for 7 sacks, knowing that Abdullah is going to be a 3rd down designated pass rusher anyways, by virtue of his size and speed. That's where I'm curious if he even views Abdullah as that 4th edge rusher. And so that's where I just say there's less bodies in that room, and it needs to be fortified, whether that is through a premium draft pick or old friend Bud Dupree is still out there out on the street.
Before we continue, I just want to think about the optics of maybe that scenario where we draft an edge at 17 and they don't pay Josh Allen before the draft. I just know the virtual reaction of Jaguars Twitter and just a Jaguars fan base in general would be as toxic as one can be. So I don't know that, that hasn't stopped Baki before for doing something that kind of makes the Jaguars fan base question him more than they already have. I'm one of the biggest critics. I went on a big rant last week talking about sitting on your hands, not doing anything. And that would just be the emphasis of what my frustrations have been during the Balky tenure. So as much as, maybe there is a good player like a Byron Murphy, or like maybe, I don't know, like I'm looking at the top 30 visits, Chop Robinson from Penn State. If you take a guy like that at 17, or like late in the 1st round, if you do a trade back, that could get on a lot of people's bad side, in my point of
Yeah,
view.
well, Chop in particular would be a project, and I'm not okay at this juncture of the franchise's history taking a project in the 1st round, regardless of position. I also think, John, you and much of Jaguars Twitter, and I'm not trying to throw a coworker under the bus here, but you have all been listening to Leon Searcy a little bit too much. Because he has been banging that drum for at least 2 months now, that if we get Jared Verse, that's disrespect to Josh Allen, and the locker room is not going to like it. I can tell you from talking to the guys in that locker room, they believe Josh Allen is getting paid. They understand that these deals don't just happen overnight. And yes, you can blame Trent Baalke that he didn't talk to the agent soon enough. The agent would tell you as much too. This conversation should have been happening in early January, not late January after Trent's introductory presser. I totally agree with that. But the truth of the matter is that Josh Allen and every other guy in that locker room wants to win. And they see where this league is headed. It's about passers, it's about pass catchers, and it's about pass rushers. And you need to have plenty of talent in each of those three departments in order to be a successful team in the National Football League. I also think it is, quite frankly, unsustainable for Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen to continue to see 85% of the snaps. You don't see Nick Bosa playing 85% of the snaps. I guess you did see Max Crosby, but that again was because it was a depleted edge room. And I just think if you are to preserve the health of these players for the long haul, if they really are cornerstone pieces, you need to add to that room, whether it is the 17th overall pick or, and this is where I am okay, once you get past the second round, the edge rusher class is fascinating because you have a couple of projects / could they be Yannick Ngakoue? Could they be a guy who takes 2 to 3 years to develop in the third round? And then there is as steep a cliff at that position as I've seen in the last 4 years. And so that's where I think the Jaguars have to address it at some point before day 3, and I believe they will.
I think it's pretty interesting what you mentioned with about Abdullah, how whether Nielsen's going to see him as kind of more of a full-time edge or an inside linebacker, because his history with Atlanta, they had a lot of lighter edges, but he's with the Saints specifically, they had a lot of bigger defensive bodies even now. So I definitely think with this edge class specifically, it's a lot of lighter edges in the later rounds. So, I mean, to their credit, they visited some of these later guys. I'm just really curious what the Jags are going to be looking at, because I even saw that they had a visit with, I forgot, it was another smaller edge player. Jalen
Jalex
Hunt
Hunt,
from, yeah,
yes, I
Jalen
just
Hunt.
saw it.
And he's a former safety, so he's more of another smaller edge kind of player. So I'm just curious where if they're kind of in the later rounds, are they just going to take a lighter guy because there's not that many bigger guys available? Are they going to try to find their kind of guy? I think it's really fascinating depending on what they're looking for at that position. I mean, Jared Verse is a lot more of a bigger power body. He would fit the scheme perfectly. So it really just depends on what are they looking for at that position, and if, hey, maybe it's the fourth round and this guy doesn't necessarily fit the scheme that well, but he's still got talent. Let's give him a visit. I'd be okay with them drafting a lighter edge player if they think it can work. I'm just very curious but especially with this class as a whole, how highly do they attack it? Because if they really want a bigger body, there's not that many players. There's a couple guys who can kind of play inside and outside in terms of a full-time edge player. That's a bigger 260 kind of frame. There's a lot of 240s in this class, so I think it's really interesting to see how they attack this edge class.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And by the way, if they do opt for that route of a project or a lighter guy, or if they move Abdullah to a different position room or kind of put him on an island by himself, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of signing a Bud Dupree or one of these other veteran pass rushers that's still out on the open market. Travis Gibson is making the league minimum. It's a great deal for the Jaguars. If you were to cut him, you would honestly save money. There would be no dead money, and it would actually be a feather in your cap. Now, I think he's a good football player, and he's worked with Bill Shuey before, and so it took success. So I don't think he's going anywhere. I think that may be your Arden Key signing of the season, but I still think there's room for an Angelo Blackson or a Corey Peters on the interior of the defensive line, yes, but also in that edge room, because I truly believe, and this is with all due respect to Trent Baalke, he says he lives life without regrets, but he regrets not signing a pass rusher, a veteran pass rusher in free agency late in the game last offseason. And so that's where I agree. If you were to go with a lighter guy, you have no choice, in my opinion. You have to go out and get one of those bigger dudes who's out on the market. Not bigger names, but bigger in physical stature. You bring up a good point about Verse. He is a perfect scheme fit. And our Jaguar fans that are worried about the locker room, are they really going to be that upset when on 3rd and 7, you are lining Trayvon Walker and Eric Armstead up inside, and you have Josh Allen and Jared Verse on the edge? Is anyone going to be upset if that's the reality we're living in come October or November? The answer is no.
I wouldn't really be upset. My biggest question is just as long as they pay Josh, then I found them they could take an edge as long as they pay Josh, because no matter what, I want them to pay Josh. He just means so much to this team. But if they take Jared Verse, I don't immediately think that Josh is going to get paid. Obviously, there's more opportunities for them to try to move on from Josh. But if they could pay Josh Allen and still get another edge player, I'd be fine with that. As I said before, it really just depends on, do they want to go edge early? Do they want to go corner early? How much do they attack it? And with this draft, are they going to say, okay, maybe we'll look at corners on day 2 and day 3? Because they have looked at some day 3 corners and day 2 corners as well. It's not just, Quinyon, Terrion, or Bus in the first round. So it's really interesting. And this is just talking about defense. I mean, they still need to address offensive line and receiver. So there's a lot of positions, but thankfully this is outside of defensive line. It's a good draft that matches their needs. So I'm just curious how they're going to attack this draft, because I have no clue. A lot of different ways they could attack it. They could go trenches early, and they could go so many players early, and I wouldn't be mad as long as it's the right value. So I mean, hey, if Jared Verse is there, if Latu's there, if Dallas Turner falls, Turner's more of a project, but with that athletic profile, I mean, he's a project that, I mean, Balky did the same project with Trayvon Walker. I mean, Trayvon's a one-of-one athlete, but Dallas Turner's not that far behind. So if they take one of the top 3 guys, I'd be cool with it. Even Marshawn Nealand out of Western Michigan, more of a bigger edge body, day 2. So I really don't know where they're going to attack the edge position. I think they definitely will eventually. I think it's a good debate where are they going to go for pass rush over coverage to start, because I think that'll just determine the draft as a whole.
And I think it'll also speak to how Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard view their coaching and their ability to develop players. If you go back in time 10 years ago, no one was developing cornerbacks at the rate that Chris Richard was out in Seattle with the Legion of Boom. If he can channel that energy, and if he is able to take a Renardo Green or a Nehemiah Pritchett at number 96 overall and transform them into even just Darius Williams, and now you have that guy on the cheap as opposed to paying him $12 million, much like last year when you made the decision to say goodbye to Jawan Taylor and let him get that $80 million contract. And now the Chiefs have to foot the bill. Well, you have Anton Harrison on a rookie contract for the next 4 years.
For sure. And wow, sorry. Manchester City just equalized, so sorry for being cut off there. But yeah, so I think it's just time to not avoid the big question mark in the room. We got to start diving into corners. Almost every day 1 prospect that projected day 1 pick for corner has been visiting for the Jaguars, except for Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. But everyone's on here. Nate Wiggins, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Racketshaw, the Missouri guy. Is this, I know we are talking about how this corner isn't really a lock, but it might just be if if you want to be the one to read the tea leaves.
Right. And it's all about best player available. If you talk to Doug Peterson, if you talk to Trent Baalke, they will readily admit there's multiple holes on this roster. And thus, if you don't go into a draft saying, I'm taking whoever the best player on the board is, and I'll figure out my strategy from there, then you're not playing the game of professional football. That's where I say if Verse is there and you have him graded higher overall than you do Terrion Arnold, and you also know that the depth is not there at that position, you do factor that into the decision, and maybe you do go to the podium. If Verse is gone, if Brian Thomas Jr. is gone, and the 2 corners are sitting there, if you have Quinyon or Terrion Arnold rated very high on your board, and you know if you were to trade back, they won't be there, then you also sprint to the podium. But if you're giving a similar grade to Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry, you may be willing to roll the dice and trade back, knowing that one of the 2 will still be there wherever it is you're trading back to in the 20s. And you don't want to trade back so far that you don't give yourself that opportunity, because the potential to trade back up, as we saw during last year's draft for the Jaguars, can sometimes be a little bit more difficult. And so I think by doing their due diligence and getting a scope of the entire cornerback class, it will, A, tell the Jaguars the depth of the class, and B, if they do need to spend that premium capital. This time last year, nearly half of their top 30 visits were edge rushers, and they drafted an undersized outside linebacker, Yasir Abdullah, in the 5th round. And that was it in terms of the edge rusher class. They brought all those guys in and they basically said, yeah, we're okay without them. We would take them, but we're okay without them. And so that's where I think that there are more, quite frankly, more bodies in this quarterback class than there were edge rushers even a year ago, and definitely this year, that you could say, hey, he could start day one. And knowing that other teams have other positions of need, that says to me that you bank on it. I'm just pulling up, a big board right now. You have a pretty good feeling that, even if Enos Rakestraw was to sneak into the top of the second, end of the first, that TJ Tampa and Max Milton are going to be there in the second round. We go further down the line in the back half of the second. Kamari Lassiter is a guy who didn't test well, but you turn on the tape at Georgia, a team leader. There's interest there. Kalen Carson is a quick riser out of Wake Forest, who I believe there should, if there isn't already interest with the Jaguars, should be a name to consider. I mentioned Renardo Green out of Florida State. That's one that I know folks are intrigued by. Jerry Jones, his running mate, a nickel corner primarily, but don't forget the Jaguars also do, kind of need that, even if Darnell Savage is going to start in the slot. Then you have inside-outside versatility guys like Kyrie Jackson and Cam Hart, not to mention Pritchett, who is aforementioned, DeAndre Prince out of Ole Miss, who ran very well at his pro day at Ole Miss, another guy who was in for a top 30 visit with Jacksonville. These are guys, boys, who Pro Football Network has ranked in, what? Prince is 193rd overall, and Nehemiah Pritchett is 210th overall on their overall big board. That says to me you're going to find that guy in the third or fourth round. And if you believe that maybe Ronald Darby's got to start day one, but this guy could take over midway through the season or the following year, then if you truly believe that, and there's multiple guys with that second or third round grade who could slide to the fourth, then you roll the dice and you say, you know what, we need to take the position that is also of need, but maybe doesn't have that opportunity later in the draft.
I think that's a really good point. You talked about how they also need a nickel still. I mean, as of now, they've talked about Savage as playing as kind of that star role, but I think it would be nice to definitely have more depth. I mean, if Savage goes down, who are they going to put at nickel right now? The only players that they could part nickel are the later not undrafted, but the late round defensive backs, who I'll ask a little bit more about them in a little bit, but even looking at some of the guys they've visited on top 30 visits and just more so, Nehemiah Pritchett, Ennis Rakestraw, TJ Tampa, Nate Wiggins, Cam Hart, Mike Sainstill, Jerry Jones. There's a lot of different bodies, and I think what's important is that they've had not just outside corners who have, the Seattle 33 long arm, 6'3", but even a guy like Mike Sainstill, Jerry Jones. Those are more nickel kind of players. They need a nickel as well. I think it'd be ideal if they could get a Terry on who could play nickel to start and then move outside. But if they move, let's say they double dip at corner, they get an outside guy to develop, a nickel to develop as well. That makes a lot of sense also. So depending on how early they attack corner, I think it'll depend how early they attack it again, because I think they should definitely draft at least two corners, one to play outside, one to play nickel. But if you get a guy who can do both, that's great. But not a lot of players can do both. So I think it's really interesting just to kind of see where they're going to attack it, because, unless they re-sign Trey Herndon, he's still on the market, but, they don't really have a true starting nickel. And I think Savage has good potential to play the slot occasionally, but is he going to play nickel every time he's on the field? I don't think so. So it would be nice to definitely have some more versatility at those spots. I'm a fan of the Florida State corners. If kind of my day two guys, if you could get Renardo Green and Jerry Jones, maybe round 3, round 5, that would be perfect to me. Even if you got a Cam Hart round 3, there's so many guys at corner that, as long as they can just identify, okay, this guy's going to play outside and we can coach him up in these areas and they can execute it, because as you mentioned with Chris Richard, I think they actually have a good defensive backs coach where they can actually draft a later round depth guy and develop him well. So I'm very curious to see just how they view the corners as a whole, because, if they hit on the right player around, obviously it's easy to say if the team drafts a good player at, day 3, then yeah, they're going to be good. But, with those guys, Chris Richard in the building to help coach them up, as well as a good coach in Nielsen, if they can identify the right players, then they don't have to go corner super early. It's just fascinating. Will they go corner early if the right guy's there? So it's so much things to talk about this cornerback class. So much things to talk about.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think it is interesting to note that Chris Richard was at the NFL Combine. The Jaguars didn't bring their entire coaching staff to Indianapolis for at least a full week. There was only, do the math in my head, four position coaches that were there the full week, and some others flew in depending on the day of. He was among the four that were there the whole week. And I think that number one, he and Ryan Nielsen were obviously co-defense coordinators in New Orleans together. So that makes sense that it kind of will be a similar role, if you may, here in Jacksonville, if not in title. But I also think it stresses not the need for corner, but in hindsight, it stresses the need to understand the entire class, knowing that there are 1 to 2 holes, which, by the way, the last regime was pretty high on Christian Braswell, who did play nickel predominantly at Rutgers, the 6th-round pick from a year ago. I'm curious between him and Greg Jr., what this staff thinks of those young developmental corners, Monteric Brown as well, and if that factors into their decisions at all, too.
sorry for being silent over these past few minutes. Two fantastic goals from the English sides for the Champions League had just been scored. But yeah, you're just making me think that maybe corner isn't you're spinning some truth about how corner might not be the number one position that they take, even though that it might be the most pressing need other than, the offensive side of the ball, which we may talk about just a little bit today before going deeper into it next week. But definitely some food for thought about if the Jaguars don't take that corner round one, that there is a plethora of talent that you guys have talked about that would be an intriguing option in, day two or day three in the draft, where it's just not like a pigeonhole. This you have to take it day one.
Worst thing you could do would be to pigeonhole yourself. And that's a mantra that Trent Baalke has preached. And it's exactly why he last year acquired 13 draft picks when all was said and done, because that means more dart throws. And the more dart throws you have, the more opportunities you have to be right on more than one of those dart throws.
You kind of stole my question when you talked about some of the late round defensive backs that they drafted over the past 2 years. I mean, yeah, Greg Jr. and Monteric Brown, and then Braswell, and then Eric Hallett. They drafted those players, and obviously, it's late round dart throws, but just in terms of when you have a good coaching staff, if you have some guys with some athletic talent, can they get the best out of him? I'm really curious to see how training camp will go for this defensive back room, because they're definitely going to add probably 2 bodies. So they're going to have a lot of young corners. It's going to be Tyson Campbell. Darby is the vet in the room. And then just a bunch of mid to late round picks probably. I liked how you mentioned with Braswell. I didn't know he played nickel at Rutgers. I know that there was another guy who played UDFA for the Bucks last year, Christian Isian, who was also, he played nickel for Tampa in the league. So I think even the fact that he was playing alongside another NFL player and Isian makes you think if Brazel gets on the field, we'll see what he does. I know they're high on him last year. I'm just curious because it was a different staff last year. So do they think this guy's more of a zone player compared to more of a man player? To me, that's really the thing that will make a huge difference, because if just one of those 4 players is a good depth piece, then that's going to be a nice addition to the room. If all 4 of them are just average at best, then it's 6th and 7th round picks, so you're not upset about it, but you're gonna say, man, it would have been nice to get another player. So I'm very curious to see how the battle will shake out, because we were high on Greg Jr. in the preseason last year. He definitely had some flashes. I think he might be in that nickel rotation. Braswell, we'll kind of see how he fares. Monteric Brown was the only person to actually play, and for a 7th round pick, I thought he was. I mean, for a 7th round pick as a backup corner, I thought he played about as good as you could have expected. I mean, he wasn't shutting the world. He wasn't a shutdown corner, but he also wasn't barbecue chicken every time he was on the field. So for what you're asking of a cornerback, I think it's fair. How he fit with the scheme, we'll kind of have to see. And then, just even Eric Hallett, kind of more of a safety corner guy, maybe he can play some nickel too. To me, I think the biggest question mark with the cornerback room is everyone talks about Tyson CB1, Tyson CB1. I am a little bit worried how he'll translate to playing more of a man-based scheme compared to being with Caldwell. It was, and when they try to do man with the first half of the first year with Caldwell, and then they switched to zone, it was more successful. So to me, my biggest fear is with Tyson. When he did play man, he wasn't that great. Granted, he was a younger player back then. I'm just wondering if Tyson can be a not even an elite CB1, but just a good man-to-man CB1. Because he was a pretty good corner, but there's a lot difference between playing zone and playing man, and that to me is going to be the biggest question mark because if Tyson's not good on the outside of playing man-to-man, then suddenly you need to have depth at corner.
Right. And don't forget, they tried to play man to man when Joe Cullen was the
Yeah,
defense
with Cullen
coordinator
was
as
there,
well.
and that didn't work
Yeah,
out as well.
the first few weeks, and you can chop that up to Tyson was a rookie who couldn't figure out where the ball was. You could chop it up to Shaq Griffin is a zone first corner. But within 6-7 weeks, they were like, yeah, no, we're going back to zone. And so now that's two straight regimes that said they'd come in and run man, and then because of the personnel, decided otherwise. I think that what will be it will tell you a lot if they were to draft a corner at 17. It would tell you a lot about not only where they stand with Tyson, but the type of player that they desire, that it needs to be this specific type of player. But I don't have the stats in front of me, but I've had so many listeners who are Georgia fans text into my show on 1010XL and just say that he did run man X amount of percent of the time when he was at Georgia, and he performed admirably. He didn't have to run it all that much, but when he did, the statistics were good. And so I can't speak specifically to how he performed in college and also if that's going to translate, because again, the first 6-7 weeks of now two straight regimes, they have to change up the plan. And I don't know if that was just because of Tyson. It could have been because of a multitude of reasons. Shaq Griffin was still starting in the first season of Mike Caldwell as the defense coordinator. And so it'll be interesting to see. And of course, there is the other factor of he's in a contract year. Is he getting paid before the season begins? Will that incentivize him to ball out and be the all-pro that so many have been saying he is?
Feel it's with Tyson, it's either a real sink or swim because obviously contract year, but probably going to be the best defensive coaching staff he's had in his career. But they're also going to ask a lot more out of Tyson to play man. So if we'll see if he's up to the challenge, I'm very curious how he'll translate. I mean, obviously the hamstring slowed him down, but when he was healthy, he did look good out there. When he wasn't healthy, he didn't look great. So he's going to be fully healthy to start the year, which is going to be great. I'm just very curious because Tyson's the biggest X factor. If he can even be better than he was in 2022, where he can just be a very good corner that can also play man and team's best wide receiver and do a good enough job. I'm not saying he has to be able to go to war with, Jamar Chase, and obviously with the division, we've got Ridley, we've got Diggs. If he can just do a good enough job letting those guys have, do a split second extra to get open, that'll be huge with Tyson. So that to me is the biggest X. Outside of even the later on defensive backs, if Tyson can, how he'll fare with the coaching staff is really the wild card, because if he plays great as a man corner, he's going to get paid a lot of money next year. If he just does okay, then, he'll probably get a modest size deal. But even though for most times I want the Jags to resign players early before free agency, I do think they should let Tyson kind of test the market because you don't know how he'll fare with the new scheme. He had some injury concerns. So, if he's healthy and he can get back to what he was in 2022, but even better playing more man, then he's gonna get the Brinks truck. He's gonna get a $20 million contract if he's playing great. So on Tyson's side of you, he has to play great for a contract. The Jack side of you, hey, we're gonna let this guy probably be our best corner, but maybe if he struggles a little bit, they kind of move things around. He's in a contract year; they don't have to keep him around. So that to me is the
And
biggest
don't
wild
forget
card.
too, so much of this is, can you create pressure up front? Because then that means they have to cover less time in the back end. I go back to against the Texans in Houston. We were literally counting in the press box: 1, 2, 3. The amount of time that CJ Stroud had to scramble. And to the credit of the Jaguar secondary, they held up. They largely held up against a quarterback who many believe is a top 10 quarterback in the league, and who's quite mobile. And it wasn't that the defense wasn't getting to him. It was just like, this guy slipped. And then this guy's like right here, but then, and it wasn't even like Stroud was that elusive, but there was one time where we counted almost 12 seconds and Stroud had no one to throw to, but he hadn't been brought down yet. And so that's where, again, philosophically, I'm very curious where Ryan Nielsen says, this is what I need to do what I need to do.
I do remember that very vividly of just yelling at my television screen, get this, censored out, down because like my goodness, get this mother, down because yeah, there was times during a lot of that late stretch of the season where we just could not get to the quarterback at all, which brings back to your point about how, maybe that edge rusher or interior lineman could be taken early because they feel like they do need to get to the quarterback faster. So it brings a lot less pressure for those secondary players to, cover deep down the field during those scenarios.
Yes, exactly.
Guess now the one last question, well, not probably last, I'll have some more, but I'm just curious because they just did a visit with USC safety Kalen Bullock, who's more of a free safety type player. Cisco's on last year of his deal. To me, it feels that if there's one position Bulky's going to draft that's going to make everyone mad because we're just going to draft this guy, I feel it's going to be safety. But at the same time, with Cisco being on a contract year and kind of same thing with Tyson, where if you're not, he was injured. I'm just very curious how do you think there's a maybe chance they draft a safety kind of early, or do you think you're just gonna roll with Cisco and a late round guy? Because I have no clue.
I have no clue to the extent of maybe Ryan Nielsen and his staff don't like Antonio Johnson, don't like Andre Cisco, but by all accounts, part of why that staff came here was because they did like some of the players that were already in the building. Was it the safety room? I'm not so sure. They went ahead and they re-signed Daniel Thomas, who I know predominantly is a special teams ace, but that says to me that they liked the way that this safety room was structured. I understand they said goodbye to Rayshon Jenkins. A lot of that was because of the bottom line and the fact that he is getting up there a little bit in age. And many people in the building believe that Antonio Johnson, who the Jaguars had a second round grade on, and just continued to slip to the fifth round and then fell right into their lap, which if you're Trent Baalke, if Antonio Johnson pans out, that's the one where you're like, you got lucky because you had a second round grade on him. He was one of the first players that they graded, to my knowledge. And there were people who around the league thought he could go in the first, second round. And then he was kind of a no-show at the combine. There were questions about character. But if you get that guy in the fifth round and he really can be a, four down guy, a legitimate starter who also can come inside for you, then yeah, then I don't see a world in which they go safety until later. And I think it's an incredibly weak safety class. And so I would like to think that that's just the Jaguars doing their due diligence. And, I just don't see a world where they're going to be sitting there at 114 boys. And let's say they've addressed in some particular order, corner, edge rusher, and wide receiver. If we're talking best player available, I just don't see a world in which you're sitting there at 114 and a safety is the best player available unless a single safety has not been drafted yet. So I think it's due diligence, but now that I said that, yeah, he's definitely the pick at 96.
No, it's going to be a linebacker.
God damn it. We didn't even talk about it. It's not worth talking about because there's no way. But before Mia, you said you got to bounce soon. So before we go, before I started this video call today, I made a thread about 10 different kickers that could be, third round picks or third round day 3 picks or undrafted free agent priority signings. That you're also a special teams person. So what do you have on some of the special teams or kickers in general that I've looked at today? Since you also do a little bit
Yes,
of homework.
punting is winning, John. Punting is winning, and kickers matter too. So I'm scrolling through your prospects right now because I was genuinely curious. The big 3 for me, to my knowledge, are Will Reichert out of Alabama, Cam Little out of Arkansas, and then one of the names that you do have here is your number 2 kicker, which is Joshua Carty out of Stanford. Those are the big 3 from what I have been told and what I have read, with Harrison Mevis of Mizzou in that number 4 slot, of course, the most infamous thicker kicker in the college ranks we've seen in recent years. So let's start with Reichert. Reichert is the all-time scoring leader at Alabama, I believe in the SEC as well. Accuracy is there. Leg strength has been questionable at times. I wrote about him in my mock draft 1.0 on 1010XL.com if you want to go check that out. I am curious, knowing that they added Joey Sly in free agency. I think that's kind of a Band-Aid. They claimed Riley Patterson and brought him back. So you already have 2 kickers in the building. But knowing the Jaguars reported interest in Jake Moody before he was selected by the San Francisco 49ers in the third round last year, knowing how many kickers they've recycled and tried to bring in, the fact that they went out and drafted Brandon McManus with, the idea that as much as he had the altitude in his favor at Mile High, he does have a strong leg. That's the reason they cut Riley Patterson, the reason they said goodbye to Matthew Wright, sorry to our Knights. And that is where I say they want the guy with the biggest leg. Thicker kicker Harrison Mevis has a hell of a leg. I believe of the top three that I listed, Cam Little is not only the most consistent, Arkansas's second all-time leading scorer and their leader in field goal percentage, so the accuracy is there, but he has the track record of being most accurate beyond 50 to 55 yards. And so if they are to take a kicker, I believe you should be looking into Cam Little from Arkansas. And yes, because I also want to have people that I work with be confused by Trayvon Walker and Walker Little and Walker Little and Cam Little.
See, I didn't even list Cameron Little in my kicker thread, so now I got to do one more just for the sake
That's
of
why
it.
we talk special teams, John.
Yeah, but it's funny because
That's why we gotta talk special teams, man.
you talked about thicker kicker, and there's one from UNLV that I also found out called Jose Pisano, who's also at 5'9", 220, who's all that's basically another thick boy, but he
He play
was
O-line?
no, 5'9", 220 at kicker, which is, he came from FCS, transferred to UNLV, finished last season with 26 of 29, and he was like 10 of 13, yeah, 10 of 13 from 40 or more. So I found that very interesting as well. How he was also a first team All-American and grows a candidate just from like transferring from small school to UNLV. That's just like another like interesting tidbit if you want someone late round. That's just a guy that was like, damn, I want to see what this man like in an NFL camp and try to go for it just because of the story sometimes.
I want to know what happened with destroying. Like, I knew he was a YouTuber because he was in a Jags Instagram once. Now he's a
Mhm.
kicker. I saw that he got hurt. I
Yeah,
don't
Did he get
follow.
hurt?
Yeah, what?
he was trying to make a tackle and then he injured his neck, so he's out. But
So there goes that idea.
former UFL kickers though, well, not current UFL, Jake Bates, Michigan Panthers kicker, 64-yarder and a 62-yarder. The leg strength is there, people. I would
He's gonna
sign.
get signed by somebody. I
The
mean, look at
Lions
what
already inquired on him, so
look
I
what the
mean,
Dallas Cowboys were able to do last year.
that's true. Was it Havrisik, I think? What was it? What was the
He
kicker's name?
is.
there was
Let me pull up
Brandon
his-
Aubrey from the
Yeah,
Cowboys.
Oh,
Brandon
yeah,
Aubrey.
Aubrey.
That's
Okay,
it.
okay,
And then
yeah.
he literally didn't miss a kick until the playoffs, which is when I knew it was Kiggies. But
I think I was thinking about the Rams kicker too, who did some time in XFL, if I'm not mistaken.
last question for Mia: are you getting an Indiana Fever Caitlin Clark jersey?
I will be purchasing an Indiana Fever Caitlin Clark jersey. I was folding laundry last night, and my boyfriend literally said to me, "Oh, here's your other Caitlin Clark shirt, and here's your other Caitlin Clark shirt." I only have two, I promise. I have the jersey.
You could
and
have
then
more. I wouldn't blame you.
right, and then you have if you break it, you own it shirt. Because yes, I bought that the moment I saw that they were handing out those Nike shirts on the court. I was like, yes, I need to go on Fanatics right now and buy one. But yeah, I definitely will. I like that Pat McAfee has been rocking with, he's got his, I'm assuming it's a Pacers, the alternate, the number 1 jersey, which I guess is his or it's Halliburton's or somebody. I love that color scheme. I kind of hope the Fever decide to like team up and do something in that color scheme.
The only good thing to come out of the state of Indiana.
Yes. Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Although Denny Thompson just walked past me and said hi to me. So
All right, well, good
Oh
to have you
boy.
on, Mia. Thank you for answering our questions, just talking draft, talking ball. And we're about 2 weeks away from the draft, so I guess we'll see. But hope you have a good rest of the day. And just thank God we got to talk special teams as well, because John should be the only person to talk about kickers. So
I'm a psychopath, and that's never gonna ever change. Mia and Javal, you know that more than anyone. I'm a fucking psychopath.
until you get a shirt that says punting is winning, you're not that much of a psychopath.
That's
So
true. I don't have any
a,
special team shirts or jerseys or
a
anything of the
pleasure,
sort.
a pleasure as always. And speaking of t-shirts, I look forward to my reoccurring guest t-shirt at some point down the line.
Oh boy, Jagged Edge merch. That's something way down. Like Javal is the expert in he's the expert in the merchandising
I
game.
can make
So
merch. I got it.
There you go. He's rocking his brand right now. That's fantastic. If you don't know where to catch you up, you got a new time slot, Mia? Tell us where to find you.
Yeah, so I'm still in the same ish time slot with
Oh, just
our
different show.
reshuffled lineup. Yeah, so 12 to 2 p.m., not 12 to 3 p.m. Helmets and Heels is now a daily program. And so that is my primary show here at 1010XL. So you can catch me Monday to Friday. I get to go home a little bit earlier. However, we are in the process of doing so much more in the multimedia world at 1010XL. So that does dominate the rest of my work hours. And so keep an eye out. We'll have a lot of exciting stuff coming in the months and weeks ahead.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us again, Mia. This is like your fourth or fifth time talking to me and Javal. So once again, thank you for being a constant help for this podcast, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Always, friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Javal, do you have any final messages before we log out today as well?
It was 2-0 games. So Man City, Real Madrid tied at 3. Arsenal, Bayern tied at 2.
I
So,
know. All the
but
freaking goals in the second half for Real Madrid and Manchester City were all fucking bangers. I was just like, I know. I hope you didn't notice me just like going like,
I
oh my,
kind of noticed.
yeah. It was like, oh my God, like what the hell is going on here? It's like it's just Champions League football, classic matchup between Real Madrid and Manchester City. If anybody doesn't watch soccer and if you're still tuned in, Madrid and City is basically like the Chiefs and the 49ers, basically. Just juggernauts on both sides of the ball, just trying to just, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words for how good that game was. So, Javal, we got the defensive side of the ball down. We have to take care of offense next week. How do you feel after talking with me today about looking at the defensive side of the ball for the Jags going into the draft in a couple weeks?
I mean, I was still pretty open to the idea of edge at 17. I don't know how it really just depends on their philosophy because Simeon feels that Bulky wants to draft starters in the first round. So I don't know
Hmm.
if he's going to draft a rotational player. Then again, I mean, he didn't get any edge depth last year, so maybe he's going to overcompensate. I don't know, man, but to me, it really does feel that in terms of edge, they probably it's weird because they have a bigger hole at corner than edge. But I kind of think now that I'm talking about it, I think it kind of does make more sense to go edge first and then corner early. But I wouldn't be mad if they drafted a corner early also. So there's so many different routes they can take. They're gonna find the one to piss us off. That's gonna be the most hilarious thing. But I'm just it was funny we didn't talk about linebackers. I still have a sinking gut feeling we're gonna take a linebacker earlier than everyone wants it. They're gonna be to be linebacker 6 on the team, by the way.
Oh, so like the tiny linebacker from Oregon. That's gonna be like a day three pick. We take him round three for no reason whatsoever, right?
But I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, safety at least it would piss me off, but I could kind of see the reasoning behind it. If they draft another linebacker, they would have to, they could draft Marvin Harrison at 17 and they could draft a linebacker at 48 and I would say I would give the draft an S grade. Okay, but I don't know. It's just I'm definitely I just want to fast forward to camp because I think more so than just the players that we'll draft, a lot of the success depends on the players they drafted the past 2 years, because you just need one of Greg Jr. or one of Monteric Brown, one of Eric Hallett, or one of Braswell to just be, a solid NFL depth player, and then you don't be as needy. If one of those
Hmm.
guys can be a starting nickel, that would be great. They drafted those players to hopefully develop. We saw a little bit of Greg Jr. in the preseason. We saw Monteric Brown in the regular season, but he was more outside. So, it would be great if they could draft if one of those guys they drafted could be either a starter or just a good backup piece. If they all flop, then it's kind of embarrassing. No, I mean they're all late round picks anyways, but when you draft that many late round picks, you're hoping that one of them sticks. So we just need one of them to stick. So I guess we'll see how everything goes, man. I'm just very the closer it gets to the draft, the more I'm saying, okay, the Jazz could attack this draft in a lot of different ways and come out successful. But the important thing is they just draft players that actually they have a plan for. Don't no more drafting Chad Muma to be linebacker 3 and then he doesn't contribute. No more drafting Brenton Strange to be your third string tight in the second round. Just draft players that will actually see the field and contribute.
It sounds like you're
So that
asking for the bare minimum, and that's just something that
that's all I'm
NFL.
asking for. That's so sad, man. Because I was just thinking over the past two drafts is their history of drafting players when they draft players actual plan. It's been okay. It hasn't been amazing, but even with going back, I mean, 2022, them drafting Fortner, yes, the pick was terrible, but the pick made sense at the time. Them drafting Chad Muma did not make sense back then, and still doesn't make sense now. So it's just essentially a third round pick that's basically wasted. You can't waste draft picks this year. You can't. It's make or break year. I kind of get last year they thought the team was good enough, so they wanted to develop players. Clearly, it wasn't that good, but they had 12 draft picks. Only two of them really contributed, and even Antonio was a contributor, but he wasn't a full-time starter. So you just need to leave the draft with saying, okay, these players are going to play X amount of snaps. They're going to contribute on not just special teams. They're going to shoot on offense or defense, and they're going to have a role and a smart plan for them. Just don't piss me off. That's all I'm asking for. It's so simple, but I know I'm going to get mad when they draft the safety in the second round. And I'm just going. So
We're just
I
gonna
don't know,
try to
man.
manifest positivity after my tirade last week. So it's funny, we flipped again about how we feel. I feel a lot better talking to Mia about all this. So
I feel good, but I'm
yeah,
also
nervous. It's good to be a little bit nervous though, because the team has shown more times than not that they don't usually make the right decisions this time of year. So all we can do is just hope that it changes. But at the end of the day, maybe it is the hope that kills you at the end. So we'll leave it at this right
hope is a
now.
dangerous thing.
It is. We'll get someone to talk about offense next week. Once again, Mia, thank you. Javal, thank you for being my co-host for this gracious endeavor of talking the pain and suffering and hopefully potential future joys of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll just be back at it next week. Like, subscribe. Uh, yeah. Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts
Yes.
is, as I said before, Trent. I don't care how highly graded you have this linebacker. Just don't take a linebacker before round 5. Don't take a safety before round 4. Just all I ask you for. Just give us the bare minimum.
Just
Take players
logic.
that make sense.
Use logic. And I'm not talking about the 1-800 song from Logic, just actual like
That we
human
will have
logic.
whatever position you take Ventrell Miller to trade up for Ventrell Miller in the fourth. Just don't do that. That's all I'm asking for, John. I'm just asking for the bare minimum.
Okay, you're gonna make me want to play the song now after that, and not
Okay,
this
yeah,
song either. So you know,
I'll end now. I'll save the pessimism for next week when they draft the wrong receiver.
oh my God.
But
All right, offense next week. I don't know who we're gonna bring, but we're just gonna make it as good as we possibly can be. Javal, have a good rest of your night, and I hope the Magic win the Southeastern Division.